Hello. In this video you'll see me make this pair of bedside tables which were inspired from a Victorian pot cupboard. So the first thing I'm doing here is cutting to length into more manageable pieces some rough cut kiln dried oak. These are all twisted and, as the name implies, rough in texture and finish, so I'm flattening one face over the surface planer and then running them underneath to parallel the other side. This is called thicknessing. Once we've got the two parallel faces, I'm using the table saw to rip the correct angle onto the edges. Now the main design feature of these tables are the fluted sides, and so to achieve this slight subtle curve I'm using a technique called coving here. This is running the piece of wood very slowly over the table saw blade to transfer that curved profile onto each segment. I was making three bedside tables here, so you can see the quantity of components in the background there. The table saw leaves quite a rough finish, so I'm using a tool called a cabinet scraper here, which is a piece of spring steel with a burr on the edge, and slowly refining that shape by hand. And you can see the rough off the saw finish on the left hand side and the curved profile after it's been scraped. And then of course some sanding with a foam sanding block. This took hours, I promise you. So we're using the crosscut sled on the table saw to get these all to the correct length, and you can see on the right hand side that little red stop which ensures that each component is identical. It's always easier to sand the inside before you glue it up, so I'm using the random orbital sand here, going up through the grits just to smooth out and clean up that inside face. So I'm masking the edges so that any glue squeeze out is mostly on the tape, and I'm using masking tape somewhat acting as a clamp here, stretching that tape in tension on the outside, which means once I've applied the glue I can use just a couple of clamps to clamp that shape together. You can see here how that tape is holding that form. And all the satisfying glue coming out the bottom, and here you see, just scrape that glue off with a rough chisel, they kind of pop off. It's satisfying. So we're moving on to the top and bottom panels now. This is a template, I believe it's 14 inches in diameter, and again rough cut oak, and using a jigsaw to take this down into more manageable pieces. And then I'm running it over the surface planer to flatten one face. Now, as these boards are a bit wider, there's slightly more of a cup already installed in them, so that's why it takes a few passes just to make those perfectly flat. And then, like before, I flip the machine in the other setting and I can thickness these components. I made a few of these tables, as I said. I always make a spare top just in case any cracks appear. Now these tops are made of two separate pieces. If it was one wide piece, it would be more liable to cupping, which wouldn't be very good. You've got this fence set at 90 degrees to the cutters, and I'm refining a pair of sides, which I then install these dominoes in, or these are the slots, the mortises for the dominoes, which are kind of an oval dowel. They're more for alignment so that when I glue the two pieces up, they don't shift around. So now I've got those slots in place, I can then go and glue up the two halves. And I'm using clamps on both sides, and this again prevents any cupping at this stage. I'm using a straight edge just to ensure that we haven't installed any cup into the top at this point. Now I've traced around my template, and here I'm cutting on the bandsaw the approximate profile, leaving about 2 or 3 millimeters of excess material there. That blade can just cut that curve, which is very handy. Otherwise I'd have to change to a smaller blade. So I can screw that template on, ensuring it's lined up with that middle seam. And I take it over to the router table where I've got a flush cut router which has a bearing that references off of that round template you just saw me screw on. You've got to go quite slowly here to ensure you don't get any rough edges or any tear out. And then these table tops have a lovely subtle curve which again is applied by this specific router cutter. You can see here when I turn it over, you can see the approximate shape. Once it's sanded, it's much smoother and cleaner than that. So now these segments, or this set of 4 segments, has dried, I can spend a while to clean up any excess glue squeeze out there that the tape didn't prevent. This always takes a while as well. And then if there was any discrepancy in between the segments on the outside, again, now's the time to sand those. And I can put the 3 4-section pieces together. One 4-section piece will be the door, the other 2 will make up the main body. And I'm using a hand plane here just to refine that angle to ensure that when it all comes together, as I'm gluing it up now, everything fits neatly. So again, I'm using the same tape technique as before, spreading that glue in there, and then I put the door in place and use lots of tape around the outside to clamp it together. Having that door in place ensures that when that glue sets, that door's definitely going to fit in there. You can see it pulls that shape together nicely, and you get a really nice joint just from the tape. So we've got a pair of brass hinges on these tables. They're pewter plated. So I'm using a scalpel and a marking gauge to mark out where the hinges are going to go. Use a router to take out the excess material, majority of the material there, and then come back with a couple of chisels to refine and square those mortises for the hinges, and then I just screw the hinges in place. Brass screws, so I'm ensuring to pre-drill those holes for the screws. And there you go. So here I'm just checking that the door fits nicely, the mortises all line up. And there you go. So these have one fixed internal shelf, and I simply trace a profile onto this planed piece of wood, and I can go over to the bandsaw and cut out the approximate shape, and then to refine that shape I can take it over to the edge sander, which you're going to see now, and that will just square up and smooth the sides and allow me to take it down more finely and carefully to that shape. And then using the orbital sander again, I'm working my way up through the grits to sand those faces. So you've seen me make all the different components now, bar a couple of kind of boring internal structural pieces. I'm using Osmo oil in the raw transparent colour on these pieces. Now raw transparent I like especially because it doesn't make the oak too orange, and it keeps its natural cream colour. So you apply the oil quite liberally here, as you can see, and you let that oil soak in for 20-25 minutes, something like that, and then you come back with those 2 clean cloths at the end of the workbench that you can just about see there, and you buff off the excess material. Now adding a finish like this Osmo really allows the grain to pop, and you see those lovely medullary rays come through from the quarter cut oak grain without changing the colour too much. So I assemble these bedside tables off camera. It was just a bit difficult to film really. And then once they're together I take them outside and we have a bit of a photo shoot, which is always fun. Nice to see them come together. They've got lovely little leather handles there. And here it is in the finished state. Now if you would like a pair of these made for yourself, please do email me. My email is in the description below. Thank you very much for watching.